You're listening to the Immortal Icons of Dance podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Johnson. In this week's episode, we are celebrating the centenary of Maria Tallchief. Born on January 24, 1925, in Fairfax, Oklahoma, Elizabeth Marie Tallchief was raised on a Native American reservation to her father, a member of the Osage tribe, and her mother, of Irish and Scottish descent. As a child, she was known as Betty Marie, and it was not until later that she adopted the name Maria Tallchief. When she was just 3 years old, she began ballet and piano lessons. At 8 years old, her family moved to Los Angeles to pursue better dancing opportunities for Maria and her younger sister Marjorie, who also became a successful ballerina. Maria's teacher was Bronislava Nijinská, and after studying with her for 5 years, she moved to New York at the age of 17 to pursue a career in dance. She was taken as an apprentice with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, where she soon achieved soloist status and danced in the corps of many ballets, from Scheherazade to George Balanchine's Serenade. Balanchine himself saw Tallchief for the first time in the operetta Song of Norway, where she danced in the corps and understudied Alexandra Danilova. Balanchine fell in love with her, and they married in 1946. When her contract with the Ballet Russe expired in 1947, she followed Balanchine to the Paris Opera Ballet, where he was a guest choreographer. When the New York City Ballet was founded by George Balanchine and Lincoln Kirstein in 1948, she was a principal dancer. Her immense popularity with the American public caused her to become known as America's first prima ballerina. He created many ballets for her, including Symphonie Concertante, the Sylvia Padada, Orpheus, Night Shadow, The Four Temperaments, Allegro Brilliant, and Scotch Symphony. In 1954, she was the first to portray the Sugar Plum Fairy in Balanchine's production of The Nutcracker, endearing herself to thousands of children in the audience every year. She was also especially well known for her portrayal of the Firebird in Balanchine's ballet with music by Stravinsky. In the 1950s, Maria performed as a guest artist with many companies, including the San Francisco Ballet, the Royal Danish Ballet, and the Hamburg Ballet. In 1955, she rejoined the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo as a guest artist, famously receiving $2,000 a week, the highest salary ever paid to any dancer at that time. In 1956, Maria got remarried, this time to a man named Henry Passion, and took a leave of absence from the ballet to become a mother in 1958. In 1960, she joined the American Ballet Theater. She was Rudolf Nureyev's partner of choice in his televised American debut in 1962. In 1965, Maria surprised the world by announcing her retirement from the stage. She had been the first Native American to hold the rank prima ballerina, and was now ready to pass her love and respect for her art to younger dancers. She became the artistic director and beloved teacher of the Chicago Lyric Opera Ballet in 1975. From 1981 to 87, Maria became the founder and artistic director of the Chicago City Ballet. In celebration of her enduring impact on American ballet, Maria was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1996. She received the NEA's National Medal of Arts in 1999 and was posthumously inducted into the National Native American Hall of Fame in 2018. As a part of the U.S. Mint's American Women Quarters program, Maria Tallchief was honored in 2023 with a quarter. It includes her name in both English and Osage script, alongside a likeness of Maria dancing the Firebird. This winter season at the New York City Ballet, the company honors Maria Tallchief by performing 3 works that were created for her: Scotch Symphony, Firebird, and the Sylvia Padada. Speaking to us today about Maria Tallchief as a teacher and mentor is Diana White. Diana was a ballerina with the New York City Ballet under George Balanchine and Jerome Robbins. Diana started dancing at age 4, and at age 14 became a member of the Lyric Opera of Chicago Ballet under the directorship of Maria Tallchief. There, she was seen by Balanchine, who awarded her a scholarship to the School of American Ballet. He invited her to join the New York City Ballet 1 year later. During her 20-year career at New York City Ballet, she worked closely with Balanchine, Robbins, and Peter Martins. Her principal repertoire included many roles, including classics such as Balanchine's Apollo, The Four Temperaments, Western Symphony, Serenade, and more. She toured internationally with the company and as a guest artist and appeared several times on the television's Live from Lincoln Center and Great Performances. In 1992, she co-founded the Scarsdale Ballet Studio with Christian Claessens. She has served on the faculty of the Conservatory of Dance at Purchase College and is a master teacher and judge for the Youth America Grand Prix. She is one of a select number of people who have been chosen by the George Balanchine Trust and the Robbins Rights Trust to stage their masterpieces on companies and schools worldwide. Since 2004, she's worked with such companies as the Paris Opera Ballet, the National Ballet of China, the Boston Ballet, Hong Kong Ballet, and the English National Ballet. I hope you enjoy our conversation. In today's episode of Immortal Icons of Dance, we are here talking with Diana White about her experiences working with Maria Tallchief. Diana, could you first tell me about your early training?
Well, my mom loved the ballet. She grew up on a farm, but somehow she fell in love with ballet. And she would go once a year. And rather than hire a babysitter, she brought me to a ballet when I was 3. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was the Leningrad Kirov Ballet with like Kolpakova and Solovyev, I think. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of like from that moment, even I can practically remember, I can remember. And I just started dancing around the house, and it was one of those, so like, we better put her in some kind of school. So they brought me, I grew up in Park Ridge, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, and the local school was Miss Willow's, and so I went there at age 4 in my blue tutu and white bobby socks. And I just never felt that I would ever be or do anything else from that moment. Yeah. And when I was 6, that studio closed and I went to another one, and this teacher was a little more serious, and by then I was very serious, and she put me with an older group of dancers. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of thought I was a grown-up, but it was catch as catch can. It wasn't a conservatory training. Mm-hmm. And when I was 10, I went to a little more serious school that was teaching Cicchetti method, but it was still only 3 times a week. But at that, I shouldn't say no, that was a little bit later, but when I was 10, I went to an audition for Midsummer Night's Dream, and I got cast as a bug. Mm-hmm. And so that was when
whose production of Midsummer Night's
Dream?
The
New York City Ballet. Uh-huh. And it was the cast with Edward Villella and John Clifford and all of those people. And there was Mr. Balanchine, and I was backstage, and that was when I decided that it was New York City Ballet or bust. Uh-huh. So I just continued with my training, which was 45 minutes from my house, 3 times a week, but I became obsessed with the library, in fact, and used to go to the public library to read all the reviews about the ballet companies, all the books I could get my hands on. I read George Balanchine's Complete Stories of the Great Ballets cover to cover.
Oh, wow.
And then I researched what was the music for each ballet he was choreographing, and I would check out the LPs in the library and listen to them. Wow. And picture what I thought they would be. So I decided I was going to get to the New York. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I was going to get there.
Mm-hmm. Now, when did you become aware of who Maria Tallchief was?
So that had to have been when I was maybe 6 years old, again, at the library. Although my mother probably would have told me about her by then. My mother shared a lot of cultural information with me from an extremely young age. And I was also an avid reader in the children's library. And I kind of remember the book. I think it was maybe 5 ballerinas profiled, and there was the picture of Maria Tallchief with her story. She in her Swan Lake costume, but also the picture of she and her sister when they were on the reservation in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, it was sort of a given. She was the most famous American ballerina, maybe maybe the most famous ballerina ever, as far as I was concerned, in 1965.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then when did you first get to meet her?
Well, because as I told you, my goal was to be in the New York City Ballet, and I sent a photograph of myself when I was 13, to the School of American Ballet, asking to be admitted, and they sent a letter back saying, on the basis of my photograph, that I was admitted. So I then wrote back and said, well, I need a scholarship. My father was a school teacher. There was no, and I said, they wrote back saying, well, you would have to come to New York and audition for the scholarship. So still wasn't sure, but one day, I remember exactly where I was, on the back porch of our house, and my mother always had the classical music station on. And there came on an announcement, Maria Tallchief is going to become the new director of the Lyric Opera Ballet of Chicago, and she's holding auditions for dancers age 18 and up. And I said to my mother, I said, that's how I'm going to get into New York City Ballet. She was married to Balanchine. We have to go.
Yeah.
And so I went to the audition. I was 14. And I did the audition, and after it was over, she pulled me to the side and she said, you're not 18. And, and she said, well, don't worry, share your, to share my contact information. And so what actually ended up happening was she formed an apprenticeship for me, and I took company class, which she taught every day from age 14. And at first, I couldn't, the very first year, I couldn't, or the first season, I couldn't perform in the opera. I was too young. But as soon as I was old enough for a work permit, I was in the corps de ballet. And somehow, because of the strength of her name, and a letter she wrote, I was able to be released from school early every day. And I was on some kind of a work permit. And I hired a tutor, and I did all my required studies, and I was getting some kind of credit for being employed.
Yeah.
And so I used to take the train. I used to go to school in the morning till 10, and then a taxi would pick me up and take me to the train, and then I would take the train to Chicago and walk across the bridge to the Lyric Opera, and her class was at, I guess, 11 o'clock. So I took a class every day, and we performed in the opera, and I would take the train back home at 11 at night.
Wow. What were your early impressions of her? Could you illustrate for us, how she stood, how she walked, how she spoke, how she dressed?
She was definitely larger than life, prima ballerina assoluta. She owned every bit of that title. And always, she was beautifully coiffed, always beautifully dressed. I remember her mink, I remember her pearls. In the studio, she wore very classy black, sort of tailored blouse and stretch pants and a big diamond ring. And of course, that huge smile, but the very commanding voice that was very, very cultured. So I guess, I was awed and terrified at the same time. Yeah. I personally never saw her really let down her guard. I never saw her dressed casually. I'm not saying she never did.
Right.
But I never saw her in a t-shirt. I never saw her as anything but this grande dame.
Yeah.
And high society, not only a ballerina, but mover in high society in Chicago. Yeah.
What were her classes like?
Her classes were intense, as one could imagine, and I felt that she was imparting what she'd learned from Mr. B. And so, which means that the bar was full of repetition, but very detailed and very precise. We did the 32 tendus front, the 32 side, the 32 back, you know, everything very square, but with 150% intention and effort. So their combinations were not complicated, very, very basic. But I think that she was teaching in the way that she had been educated by Balanchine, and the way he educated his company, which was sort of a ragtag group as he was assembling it in the early days, and just kind of codifying the way he wanted all of the basic things done. And it was not only just like the perfect fifth, the wrapping the foot in sur le coup de pied, pointing right in front of your nose, but the movement, the effort, you know. She would say, you know, battement dégagé is like a grand battement, but somebody stopped your leg, you know, and you were pushing your leg through the air, and you couldn't move my arm for $1 million. So there was all of this intensity. And I remember passing out. Literally.
Really?
Yeah. From a combination of fear and desire to please. That I remember being at the bar, towards the end of bar, and just all of a sudden, like, you know, and I would be on the train on my way to class with butterflies in my stomach, because it was so important to please her.
Yeah. I've had both of those feelings before, on the way to class, and then at the end. I haven't passed out, but I've gotten darn close to it.
Yeah, it's like you're wrung out, like every,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that definitely informed the way I worked. I mean, for years to come, you know, and part of me, just something I probably later needed to understand, was working hard and working intelligently are not always the same, but still that sense of 150% commitment. I mean, I don't remember ever daydreaming in class or having any thought outside of what was going on at that moment. But the other thing that was brilliant, and my dream come true, and what made it spectacular, besides what the bar was like, she taught us how to appear, you know, and our line, the way we presented our upper bodies, you know, and then the icing, or more than the icing on the cake, was she used her repertoire in the class to educate us. So I learned all of those ballets that I dreamed of straight from her. I mean, and her original roles, but not only her original roles. I mean, she taught us, I learned and even performed a little bit. Eurydice from Orpheus, Apollo, Symphony in C First Movement, Sugar Plum Fairy, the Balanchine Swan Lake, Sanguinic, Four Temperaments, did I mention already? Minkus Pas de Trois, the Raymonde Paradis, that variation. I mean, she used that choreography to educate us. And to me now, I find that his choreography, in the execution of it, makes you a better dancer.
Yeah. To celebrate the 100th anniversary of Maria Tallchief's birth, I designed a commemorative ornament featuring Maria as the Firebird on it. I made them by hand, and only 24 of them exist. I've created a special discount code for podcast listeners to receive $5 off on their order. Go to shop.immortaliconsofdance.com/products/Firebird, or you can find the link in the episode description. Enter code POD5, that's POD and the number 5, to receive $5 off your order of the limited edition Maria Tallchief Firebird ornament.
When I was reading about Serenade for the 90th anniversary.
Oh, she taught us that too.
Yes. About how Serenade in itself, I think maybe it was Toni Bentley that said it in her book, that it's a labyrinth, and you come out, you learn the ballet and you come out a changed dancer on the other side.
You do.
And that it continued, like Balanchine left, all of his repertoire, but specifically Serenade, that it is like this thing that continues to train dancers.
It does.
And when you come out on the other side, you're ready for, to take on the rest of the rep. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that to be, because I did not have a conservatory training, and also I was extremely loose-limbed, very turned out, hyperextended knees, high extension, and all of this is like physically the opposite of what Maria had beautiful feet, but otherwise different. Mm-hmm. And she would always say, "You're like Mary Ellen and Dubrovska." And she didn't really know what to do with me in a way.
Yeah.
She was almost intimidated by, sometimes she would take me off point and things. She just was afraid. She didn't know how to work with all my extreme qualities. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that I had to really try to figure out on my own throughout my career, mm-hmm. Once I was in City Ballet. But I found that, the repertoire, if you start in the back line of Symphony in C, and you gradually work your way forward, mm-hmm. and into smaller and smaller corps ballets, and then into some demi things. It's like it's your academy, mm-hmm. in a way.
Right.
So, and at the time, Balanchine wasn't hiring finished products, so mm-hmm. I was lucky. I got to be educated, finish my education.
Yeah. Could we go back to some of the rep that she taught you? Any specific nuggets of wisdom that she said about certain roles that you remember?
Well, the one thing that stands out, funny enough, is when she taught us the Eurydice solo in Orpheus. It starts, the rock turns around and her back is to the audience. And she talked about projecting through your back. Mm. And I remember that really strongly, just this, you could see somebody from the back not moving, but yet they were alive and projecting, And, each role had something, like at this moment you look into the lake, what ballet would that have been?
In Swan Lake?
No, looking into the lake is when you are doing like fast point work, only leaning slightly forward and looking over the precipice, almost just so to indicate to the audience what you're doing with your feet.
Uh-huh.
I think like at the beginning of the Sugar Plum Fairy variation, when you take these little tiny steps, you look into the lake. Mm-hmm. That image helps you, and then a lot of the things that she said too, cheek in the light, or lifting your cheek to be kissed, those kinds of things just became ingrained.
Yeah.
In me. The imagery was so strong that it just became natural.
Right.
Yeah.
What about at the bar, at the center, corrections that were always coming out? What's like a very Maria correction or phrase that you would hear all the time?
I think she presented what she wanted to see before. Mm-hmm. She was very explanatory. And you will start to do it. You go, no, like this. You see, keep the heel forward and the toe back, and now present your leg to the floor. No, not like that. Present it to the floor, and until you understood this gesture. So she would show those things very clearly, how to execute the steps. There was a very broken down. Like, there was one step that she gave a lot called battement écarté, which nobody does. That I've seen anywhere, where you're sort of angled in towards the bar and your front leg is crossed over, and you rond de jambe your leg to écarté, and you look behind your elbow as your leg kicks past your shoulder to the back. And she taught us that Balanchine wanted us to look behind the elbow in écarté. And this is something that I still don't really see anywhere.
Yeah.
People do it many different ways, but I look like you. I'm so interested. I'm a nerd. I mean, I look at, do so much research and look at the photos. And if you look at photographs of Balanchine in that position, he's lifting his face and he's looking behind, and he has those beautiful hands that people call Balanchine hands, but are actually just what he learned in the Russian Imperial School. If you look at the old videos from then, that's how the hands are held.
Yeah.
He was teaching what he knew.
How did she give, or did she give any praise or compliments, whether in class or after performance, or was she more reserved with that?
I don't remember her specifically giving praise. I mean, she might have said good. Or, you could tell. I mean, she would certainly let you know if she was displeased. But we didn't expect praise. Nobody encouraged. There wasn't that kind of positive encouragement. It was just, I feel like that generation, and it's ballet was bigger than us, and the technique was so important. It was like, if you would go to church, and which I didn't do as a kid, but I'm just imagining it's like learning a catechism. You don't have to, somebody doesn't stand there and tell you, good. Yeah. They just say, do this, and if they're not telling you it's not good, then you just keep going. And I don't know, I took that upon my responsibility. She gave me keys to the studio so I could go and work on my own, something I learned how to do when I was dancing for her. If the company was on layoff, I could go.
What type of reputation do you think that she has now? And do you think it is correct? Or is there anything that you go, well, actually, time has kind of changed that. It was actually this way?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think lots of people felt traumatized. I mean, we had a parting of ways because, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into that much, but my dream was to dance for Balanchine, and to me, this was just a pathway.
Yeah.
And Balanchine did indeed come to Chicago, and he choreographed Orfeo. And I stood tall, and, and I knew he liked me, and he put me in the center and the front of all of the pieces that we were doing. But she, at the same time, really wanted to establish her own company. She didn't want to stop with doing the opera. I mean, that's not really, we were up on balconies, and we were, sometimes we were just wearing the costumes and literally lips, mouthing, like standing in front of the chorus because we were pretty, not even dancing. And she early on started teaching us repertoire, and Balanchine was helping her. And the second year that I was there, we performed Allegro Brillante, Four Temperaments, Concerto Barocco, and Concerto Barocco. And Suzanne and Jacques came and did meditation, and the group was supplemented with dancers from SAB. That was the second time I worked with him. I did third theme, and after he left and went to New York, I wrote him a letter and said, that Miss Tallchief wants me to stay. She wanted me to be, in fact, she invited me to live with her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She felt my mother was feeding me too much, I think.
Oh.
And she wanted to oversee, my growth as a dancer and cultivate me for her young company. And, but I wrote this letter to Mr. B, saying that even though I knew I could have a career in Chicago, that it had only ever been my dream to dance in his company, and I didn't care if I will only ever be in the last row of the corps de ballet. I just wanted to dance for him. And about a week after the letter was mailed, Barbara Horgan called my house, my home, and asked for me, and she said, Mr. Balanchine wants you to come to New York. And apparently he had, Maria happened to be in New York at the time that he received this letter, and he left it open on his desk while she was alone in the room. So she discovered that I had done this betrayal, basically.
Yeah.
Even though I never would have said to her, oh, I just only ever want to be in New York City Ballet.
Right.
She just said many times, you'll be a great ballerina, and if you would go to New York, you would just be in the back line of the corps. And in the meantime, Suzanne was back, and she was, as an aside, I will say this about Maria. She always spoke admirably of all of those Balanchine ballerinas. I heard her talk about how great was Suzanne, how great was Tanny, how great were these dancers in the roles that they had just, even though she may have been a diva, but she respected him so much and what he was doing that she didn't, she held all of those dancers up to us also as
examples,
models. But anyway, so
she found
our
a letter.
season, she came back to Chicago, and our season was starting, and she had discovered that I had done this, and she was very upset and called my mother, and actually I then was obligated to fulfill my contract until I was leaving for New York, but I wasn't allowed to dance, and in fact...
So obligated to fulfill the contract, meaning you were still taking class
I had to come to class every day. I had to come to the theater every day, but I couldn't, but I wasn't cast, and nobody was allowed to speak to me.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, it's funny because I was 16, It was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
But I mean, part of me, I just didn't care at that point. I wanted to get where I was going. Balanchine and that was all I wanted. I had no idea how unprepared I was for that, what that was going to be. I had been almost living as an adult since I was 14. I thought I was all grown up.
Right.
And I knew what I wanted, And so I guess she was surprised. So it was very painful, and I understand for her. And in some ways, when I look back on it now, I'm sympathetic. She was trying to do something, and why did he do that to her in a way? Take her promising, and Helene too, which was different. Helene went with Maria's blessing, and it was a different... I didn't even know this. I showed up for class on the first day, and there was Helene. The two Chicago girls arriving at once. But, so there was a real severance there. But she forgave me.
How did you feel like training-wise, how did you feel prepared for joining the company versus not? You know, you said certain aspects of class, it felt like she was just passing on what Balanchine knew. What things were different?
Well, I mean, the thing is that at 14, I was really getting a late start. I was very weak. And I got to SAB, and all of my classmates had been doing Toomey and Duden and everybody day in, day out, and I could hardly releve on one foot on point. I couldn't do a double pirouette on point.
Wow.
And even when I got in the company, I still couldn't do a double pirouette on point. And, but Mr. B was teaching class, and his classes were recognizable to me. And a few times I remember, his coming to me, and I remember in particular doing ballet, and he had me demonstrate the ballet, and I did it the way he wanted it. And he said, "Maria taught you that." And every time that I would do something correctly, he will say, "Maria taught you that." So I think in a way, he was delighted that his,
Yeah, to really see the training.
that she was carrying on.
Yeah.
All that, But I do remember the only major difference, I laugh at this, because I remember she taught us and made us do over and over pas de bourrée. And she would say, pas de bourrée. And we would go, plie down, up, and close fifth, down, in a tight fifth on the floor, like with straight knees. So we would go pas de bourrée to fifth, down. And I was like, I knew how to do that. And then I found out that now Mr. B wanted pas de bourrée to end up.
Yeah.
And that's also what made me realize at the time, and that he did change his mind sometimes. And he wanted things done differently at different times and in different ballets. Mm-hmm. There might have been a ballet where he wanted the fifth position to end on the floor. Mm-hmm. And so now, whenever I say, people will get into these heated arguments about what Balanchine wanted, sometimes I say, if somebody says they know what he wanted, run. Because we don't, we do. Each of us we all have a piece of it, and we all understand the overarching intention. Mm-hmm. I think everybody who worked with him understands that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes some of the details were not always, and what he asked somebody to do one day might not be what he would want to see the following day or season, or from a different dancer.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, I'm sure many choreographers said this in their own way at different times, but I remember reading that Jerome Robbins said that every ballet has its own vocabulary, it exists in its own world, and this step doesn't exist in this galaxy over here,
right.
So that pas de bourrée doesn't exist in that ballet, but maybe it does in this ballet.
Yeah.
Just that they all have their own language that they speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think that's one of the things that gets people who never work directly with him, or at least very close to the people who work directly with him, sometimes will hear, oh, Mr. B wanted it this way, and then it just kind of gets to be like what's the word? Not syllabus, but like the part of the canon, I guess, you know, and it's not necessarily, it was that dancer that day.
Right.
Or, opening your hip in arabesque, that some people had to, not everybody had to. Mm-hmm. They could have a nice line.
Mm-hmm. It's taken a little too far now.
Yeah.
If you like the work being done here at Immortal Icons of Dance, there are several ways you can support. The easiest ways are to subscribe to the podcast and share the episodes when you enjoy them. For just $5 a month, you can join the Vault to gain exclusive access to a large collection of dance history ephemera that I've curated just for you. This includes historic photos, footage, quotes, articles, and more. Your support allows me to continue researching and preserving this history that we all love so much.
What is an overarching lesson that you learned from Maria? Maybe not in the classroom specifically about technique, but something that you learned from either her career or her as a person.
I think that just being around her and seeing that elegance and commitment and devotion to the work, I really clicked with that, and I take that with me. I just, that sense of presenting yourself to the world in a elegant, respectful, committed way.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of the theater and the studio and the work as being a sacred space. You know, I mean, I'm not saying I can never laugh or look like a schlep or whatever, but
But you learned the value.
But I still have
it.
that sense of I'm carrying a legacy, and it's incumbent upon me to represent that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even though I see like these amazing dancers now, and I think they should be comfortable. I want them to be comfortable, but I still can't be like 100% just comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you're in the classroom teaching, because you teach and you stage now, or are you only staging?
For one thing, I just want to mention that I opened my studio 7 years before I stopped dancing, before I retired, with my ex-husband. It was just a way, you know, it was a way of planning for our future. And so I started teaching well before I retired, and it made a huge impact on my dancing, in fact. Even though it was very hard on me, I would go to my school on Mondays.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, I realized that I had to learn a lot because I didn't have that conservatory training. And so when I had to start teaching little ones and teach them how to do something and have to analyze, those were things that I never had thought through, you know. And so having to work it through affected how I started my approach.
Yeah.
Like, oh. And I discovered things that I didn't know about my own technique and my placement and everything by trying to explain it to others. But it was very hard, you know. I don't have my school anymore. I'm only working for the Balanchine and Robbins Trusts now. I only stage ballets.
How long did you have the studio?
I had the studio for 31 years. I passed it on. It still exists, but I passed it on a year ago. So I had it for 31 years, but I've been staging ballets for about 20 years. Not a lot, but more and more and more and more as the years have gone by, more and more and more.
Do you find yourself, I'll ask two questions. When you were in the studio teaching, and now when you're in the studio staging, do you find yourself repeating things that Maria gave you?
Constantly.
Like what?
Well, I always tell the story about Sur le coup de pied, because she said that that was such an important position, the wrapping of the foot and sur le coup de pied. And she would always, and when we would do petit battement, we had to have dirty ankles.
Yeah.
Right? And but that position had to be so precise and so built in that we always would shape our foot that way. And she said that she would practice her sur le coup de pied position while she was peeling potatoes for Mr. Balanchine's dinner. So I always have to tell that story, because anywhere you go, it's very rare to actually see this, picking the foot up off the floor with the heel coming forward and the toe going back, you know. And so that, and you know, what I was mentioning before, like a dégagé, battement dégagé is like a grand battement. Somebody stops your foot.
Yeah.
You're pushing against the air. It's like to try to explain these qualities. And I just can hear her and, you know, see her. And she had that way.
What about in staging?
Same, because that technique has to be in the ballet. So, and very often I teach when I'm staging, teach the company class. Last year I was at National Ballet of China for a month just to teach, only to teach, and what I knew of Balanchine, and also in Harbin, China for that matter. But the same, you know, the cheek in the light, and also one of the things that Maria talked about a lot, hips forward, and I think people misunderstand this idea in Balanchine technique that you're sort of tucking under and thrusting your pelvis front. And it's not that. What she taught is hips forward like a fashion model. You know, your pelvis is over your feet and your shoulders slightly back in that stance. And she would show that, and she looked, and she will say it's like a statue, and it is if you look, and I will tell people it's classical ballet in the sense of classical Greek sculpture. Go, and she would say this too, and you know, look at art, you know, look at classical Greek sculpture, look at Egyptian, you know, and that, again, presenting the ideal form. So I do talk about that a lot, you know. We're here, it's not only the effort, it's also the aesthetic, you know.
Yeah.
And I feel like she got that across so clearly and indelibly. And so, yes, I will constantly, and I think the thing, and I remember Suzanne actually saying this to me. She said once, you know, Mr. B told her, one day you will all be teachers. And of course, we don't want to hear that.
Right.
But, you know, and yet it's something that I now, it's true, and you don't understand what your teacher was saying until you're teaching. And then you go, oh, that's what Stanley meant when he said fifth, you know. Then you're like, when you're trying to explain it, you're like, that's what they were saying.
Yeah.
You know, so those things, but I wouldn't say, I pretty much understood what Maria was saying. It wasn't very enigmatic.
Yeah. I do think about that sometimes when I'm teaching and I can see that they're not getting the concept. And sometimes I go, you know what, maybe 3 years down the road, another teacher will say something and they'll go, oh my gosh, I remember hearing that before.
It clicks.
Yes. So
I tell dancers and students that before, if I'll give a correction and then they nod as if they've heard it before, and I'll say, oh, have you heard that before? And they'll say, and I'll say, how many times? And they go, and I said, well, then maybe you better think, because we're objectively trying to help you.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that you said, oh, well, she forgave me eventually. How did your relationship with her develop once you were further into your career?
Well, I would start to see her. Sometimes she would come to New York, and well, first I would hear, because she would come to New York from time to time, and then somebody would say that Maria would always come back and say, Diana remembers everything, you know. And the last time I had a real conversation with her was at the Guggenheim Works in Process, and she was, I think it was Freddie Franklin. Is that possible? Freddie Franklin? she was sort of restaging or coaching what she remembered of Baiser de la Fée. Anyway, it was in the early 2000s, and I went to see it, and then afterwards I went up to her, and I remember white hair. I was shocked, and we had a real conversation. She asked me how I was, and she said, "Well, you always understood very well." You know, but I told her I had a daughter and things, you know, because that, I know her motherhood and her daughter were massively important to her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the idea that I was now a mother and teaching and carrying it forward, and I promised I was passing it down. Yeah.
Is there a memory with Maria that either makes you laugh or smile?
Well, I would say mostly that would be our parodies of her. Because she was larger than life.
Yeah.
I remember her this doesn't make me laugh at all. It makes me, when I think like strong memories later, I remember her keening over Balanchine's coffin.
Oh.
So I remember her then, but she was, even when she laughed, it was kind of scary, you know, to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I ever, in fact, as I'm sitting here, my heart rate's probably up a bit, you know, just because she was formidable.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew she loved me. I didn't know it right away, but I came to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I came to understand that she did.
When young dancers look to Maria Tallchief, if they are reading about her, finding her in books like you did, finding her now on YouTube maybe, what do you hope that they learned from her now?
Oh, well, first of all, I'm once in a while, and it happened to me, I was at the National Ballet of Canada, and one of the dancers, young, came to me and she said, "Oh my God, Maria Tallchief was your teacher. She's my idol. You know, oh my God, Maria Tallchief." And when I'll often ask students about, you know, have you heard of this dancer? Have you heard of that dancer? Nobody's heard of Maria. But they have heard of Maria Tallchief because they read about her in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's so fantastic she's on the quarter because I ordered bags from the U.S. Mint. And when I went to, of course, in a place like China, they don't know. And I explained to them that she was my teacher, and I gave every dancer in the company one of those quarters. And of course, that was like, you know, that wasn't in National Ballet of China, actually. It was in Harbin because the when I was in China, it hadn't been minted yet. But the Chinese dancers were blown away that a ballet dancer was on
Currency. Yeah.
That was like huge. That was huge to them.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what they think, because needless to say, when you look, I staged Scotch Symphony in Harbin, which was wonderful because, you know, just to be staging something that had been created on her and that I had learned just excerpts from, not the pas de deux, but luckily films have been preserved. And she did some coaching for the foundation also, and I studied those videos. And it was like watching a replay of being in class with her. She was emphasizing all of the same things to Judith Fugate that she taught us. Mm-hmm. And there's this quality that it's almost like you can't find it in younger bodies, very hard to find this. I say that I've said this before, but body language, human body language, just changes over time. Even just the way people walk down the street, and the inflections, and the way we speak English, and all of this stuff changes down through the generations. So, you're not going to find a dancer of our generation that will move the way she did.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that if they look at these videos, that there's something they can see that they can take away.
Mm-hmm.
Not that, maybe every single fifth position didn't land. Don't forget those videos were taken on cement, on postage stamp-sized sound stages
studio, yeah.
and things like that, you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
slipping and sliding, and, their schedule, their work schedules were grueling, nothing like what we have now, actually. But I'm hoping that they can look and be amazed at the elegance of it, the passion. There's a couple of close-ups in the video of Maria and Andrea Glevsky, where they go in, where she leans towards him, and it's like you feel like she's really in love.
Which ballet? Which footage?
Scotch Symphony.
Okay.
She's not like a lighthearted sylph soubrette. She's romantic,
Mm-hmm.
and she would say, and I kind of point out these things, like what I see in it that makes it so special and unusual. So many people, that I never saw her perform, of course, but I did see her in the studio, second best thing. But people who saw her Firebird, people who saw, Allegra Briante, people who saw those, will still talk about it. Like it will never be the same. And it won't.
Mm-mm. With that, I think we're going to close. It'll never be the same. Thank you so much for sharing the vast array of memories that you have with Maria Tallchief.
It's always a pleasure.
The Immortal Icons of Dance podcast is written, produced, and edited by me, Lauren Johnson. Our music is written by Shelby Rassler of Jenkins & Rassler. Technical support is generously provided by Libby Lessenhop.